So I'm James Tower, and I'm the blacksmithing pastor. Hey everybody, my name is James Tower, and I'm pretty famous for being Greta's dad, and also the pastor at Lone Star Friends Church, which is the church out in the country that you see on your way to Liberal. It's kind of the only thing out there, so I'm sure you've noticed it. And I just really love your chapel theme for today. Fear used to be a really big thing that controlled my life to a great degree, and we all have fears. You know, we all have these things that make us afraid. And but I had extra problems with that. I actually grew up in a abusive and violent home and have had it cause me problems years after having gone through abuse and violence. And I know that fear can leave scars, you know, and as a person who still wrestles with trauma from childhood, I can tell you I've had a lot of healing and freedom in my life. And I know that there's still more healing and freedom out there that God has for me, and I get the opportunity to chase after that. And one of the greatest joys of my life is that my children get to grow up in a stable and healthy and wholesome environment. And they get to start in a much better place than I did. I can't always be there to protect my kids for their whole life, you know, as they live in the sinful and fallen and broken world that we live in. But I can choose to walk with God, and I can choose to show them how to do that. And to me, you know, having gone through a lot of the trauma of my childhood, that's a really healing thing to get to be a part of. And fear is still there to some degree, but I get to see courage, right? Do you know what courage is? What's courage? Greta? It's what? Braveness, right? Okay, that's related. Courage is not when you're not afraid. It's when you are afraid and you still respond in faith and obedience. It's when you still do the thing that you're afraid to do, and you do it. And walking with God is like that. So I love the verse in Isaiah 41:13. That's your theme verse. For I am the Lord your God who takes hold of your right hand and says to you, do not fear, I will help you. And I got the opportunity to go to Bible college and then later seminary. And one of the things that I was taught in my 9 years of going to college to learn to study the Bible was that if you really want to understand the Bible verse, you have to understand the neighborhood that it lives in. You don't just want to read a Bible verse. You want to understand what it is and have that one Bible verse remind you of what it says. And so in order to understand kind of the neighborhood that a verse lives in, you have to understand the verses around it, because those verses around it help you see it clearer. And you know what? Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, is a pretty confusing book. It's a pretty hard, challenging book to understand. And I want to do something to help you understand it a little bit better, to help you understand this passage theme verse that you have. Maybe just a little bit better than you might otherwise know. To understand Isaiah the prophet was a man. He was a person who was carried off to Babylon. And the people of his time were in exile. They were displaced. And to tell you a little bit about what that means, the people of God, they had a covenant with God. And they were supposed to walk in that covenant. They would affirm every year at a festival that we're going to follow this covenant. And God warned them if they didn't follow him, there'd be consequences of it. And the people of God, for a long time, had mistreated the poor. They had oppressed people who were seeking justice. They had done all the bad things that God pointed to all these other countries around them and said, this is not how it's supposed to be. And God basically came to the point of telling them, if you're going to be like these pagan neighbors around you, I want to show you what that's like. And so God raised up the Babylonians. And these people came and conquered them and enslaved them. So exile or captivity is something that God put the people through for 80 years of their life. And there was all kinds of big things that happened. You may remember Daniel in the lion's den. All this stuff happened during this time. But here's how they did that in the ancient world in exile. So if they conquered somebody, they would take all the educated people, all the people who were priests and prophets and kings and sons of kings, all the people who might someday be able to rally the people together and raise them up against the people who captured them. And they took all these people off to Babylon, right? Where they were held, surrounded by these other people in this position of weakness. And they were influenced by the culture and the corrupting forces around them. And then when they took all these people away, they brought people from Babylon, who were the people who were going to be in charge of this place that was conquered. And so they put in a government. They tried to get people to worship their false god. This is the time of the captivity. And so you had all these elite people like the prophet Isaiah and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and the king, and a whole bunch of other people were off in Babylon. And they were there trying to find out, how can we follow God in this strange, weird land that we have been drug off to? So I just want to get you to imagine for a minute what it would be like if you were captured and taken off, if the house that you live in was given to somebody else, and then you found yourself in another country surrounded by people who thought you were weird and silly, people who thought they taunted you by saying, the only reason you're in this situation is because your God isn't powerful, and maybe your God has abandoned you. That's the kind of situation that people were in during the time of exile. So I want to read for you the beginning of our chapter here. Help you understand some of these verses. So we're going to look at verses 1 through 6. If you have your Bibles and want to turn to Isaiah 41, this is what it says. Who stirs up this one from the east, who officially commissioned him for service? He hands nations over to him and enables him to subdue kings. He makes them like dust with his sword, like wind-blown straw with his bow. He pursues them and passes by unharmed. He advances with great speed. Who acts and carries out decrees? Who summons the successive generations from the beginning? I, the Lord, am present at the very beginning, and at the very end I am the one. The coastlands see and are afraid. The whole earth trembles. They approach and come. They help one another. One says to the other, be strong. So, again, if you read the book of Isaiah, you can find out who this person that's being talked about is. And this one from the east that's being talked about is the Persian conqueror Cyrus the Great, who would come and conquer Babylon, where they were held. So the people of God were captured, turned away from the covenant of God. They'd done some terrible things, and God raised up Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, to capture them and use the Babylonians, the evil things they were going to do already, to punish them. And then the Babylonians had done some terrible things. And now God was raising up the Persians to punish them. And the Babylonians had a lot of reasons to be afraid. They were trying to act tough. They were trying to pretend everything was okay, but they could tell the world was changing around them. They were trying to act tough, but it wasn't going to work out for them. And that's what this word to Isaiah was going to talk about. So God was behind this change. At the end of that 80-year period, with Daniel in the lion's den and the furnace and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and the prophet Jeremiah and a bunch of different people, big things that happened during this time, what would happen would be that later, under this King Darius, who was related to Cyrus, they would be returned to their homeland. They would get to go home because the 80 years was over. Darius of Persia would let Ezra and Nehemiah go home, rebuild the wall around Jerusalem, rebuild the temple of Jerusalem. And so this was a time of waiting and fear. And God said, I am behind this. This will be for your good. Fear not, because I am with you. But then when Isaiah points out the idolatry and the misplaced trust of the Babylonians, and to do this he talks about metal workers. By the way, I bet some of you know I have a second job as a metal worker. Anybody know what kind of metal worker I am? Go ahead. A blacksmith, right? Yeah. So smithing is a thing, an ancient thing that people did for a long, long time. And so I get to make a lot of things the old way, with a big, heavy metal object called an anvil and a hammer, and I heat the metal up really glowing hot, and I hit it with a hammer, and transform it into something different. Unfortunately, there are a lot of metalsmiths in the Bible, and there's a lot of things that it says about them, but you would get the idea that they were all bad people who did bad things. And the smiths in our part of Isaiah are no different, because these were people usually who made, sometimes they'd make tools and different things, but a lot of what they made were idols. They made little like bronze statues and things. They were statues made by human hands that were worshipped. They were false gods. And the main false god of Babylon was named Marduk. Later, he would also be called Baal in the Bible. You've probably heard of him. And Baal was a storm god in their understanding of gods. They believed in lots and lots of little gods, but not the kind of God who would create the universe. But what the Babylonians believed about storms was really strange. The Bible Project is a really neat YouTube channel. And they recently talked about dragons a lot, and I was really interested in that. And kind of just to overview what the Babylonians believed and why they thought storm gods were such a big deal, was they believed in this guy Marduk, and they believed basically in these big sea monsters, sea dragons, if you will. And the sea dragon, the biggest sea dragon of them all, was Tiamat. And when the storms would come in from the sea, they would see it as like a sea monster coming in from the sea. And they would see their false god Marduk going out to battle the sea monster. And that's what a storm was. It was a big fight between their guy and the sea monsters. And when the storm was over, they would see it as their guy winning, right? As Marduk saving the people from the forces of chaos and destruction that would come up from the sea. And so when we look at what Isaiah says here, he's describing Cyrus of Persia as a big storm that God is raising up. A storm that's been rumbling in the distance, a storm that's coming right to where they're at, and nothing is going to stop it. And it's going to bring death and destruction to the people of Babylon. And they had big reasons to be afraid. And their false god Marduk cannot save them from what is coming. And when the prophet Isaiah is discussing these metalsmiths, these idol makers, they're trying to encourage themselves, right? They're trying to talk to themselves as they're working in the workshop to remind themselves that, hey, wait, our God is strong. It's going to work out for us. But they're lying to themselves. Just to give a modern example, you've probably seen the Marvel movies with like Thor in it. Right? Thor is kind of a storm god, kind of a person, right? Like an action figure of Thor is kind of a cool thing. It can be kind of fun to play with, right? But if a real storm was coming, that little action figure of Thor isn't going to do much about the storm, right? Because it's not really real. It's just a thing that was made by human hands, made by people, to represent a God that really doesn't exist. So I want to read our next part here. Let me read how Isaiah puts this conversation that happens in the metal shop. Back up just a little bit before that. The islands have seen it in fear. The ends of the earth tremble. They approach and come forward. They help each other and say to their companions, be strong. The metalworker encourages the goldsmith, and the one who smooths with the hammer spurs on the one who strikes the anvil. One who says of the welding, it is good. The other nails down the idol so it will not topple. This is a nail that I made. I'll pass it around. It's square. And believe it or not, the nails are square. They hold really good. I'm from Oregon originally. And just to give you a little taste of how important a nail would be in the ancient world, or even just a couple hundred years ago, people who were going to go on the Oregon Trail, they would burn their house down to get all the nails, because every single one of them was made by a blacksmith. Hang out by the construction site, would make nails, the carpenters would call out for a nail, they'd make it real quick, toss it up to them, they'd drive it in and build the house. And when you came to Oregon, finding and paying a blacksmith to do that would cost a lot of money. So I'm going to pass this nail around to you. Please give it back when you're done. This is a square nail, and square nails hold really good. Round nails, like modern nails, are made with a machine, and if you think about it here, the hole that a nail makes that's round is like this. It rips the wood like this. So it's really only holding on the two sides of the nail. But a square nail actually cuts the fibers of the wood. You put it in right, and so it is perfectly seated on all four sides. It holds more like a screw holds. Anyway, I'm going to pass this around so you can check it out. And this is the tool that I made that makes nails. It's called a nail header. And you would take a bar and make a point on the bar. And then you would half cut the bar with the point on it, heat it up, put it inside this tool, twist it off when it's still hot, and then you can hit the head of the nail. I'm also going to pass around this tool that I made that makes nails. You might know that I'm trying to make YouTube videos. I know I'm recording this. It's because this is the sort of talk I want to talk on my YouTube channel about. But I recently made a video, and I showed you how nails are made in the video. And I want to show a short bit of that. If Adam was going to play the beginning of that video and then skip forward to the part about the nails. I'm going to make a couple nails. And to make nails, I have this tool here. It's called the nail header. And it's got a square hole because these nails are square. That's how they used to make nails. And they hold better actually that way. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a bar, thin bar, I'm going to draw a taper on it to make a point, and then I'll half cut it off, and then I'll put the point in here, break it off. While it's still hot, I'll knock the head of the nail into shape. So let's see how it goes. So I want to shoot for about 1.5 inches. It's going to drop down in there a little bit. I need to draw it just a little further. Like this, and that's, I'm going to get it hot, drop it in the tool, break it off, and start moving the head, hopefully it doesn't get stuck. You can see the four-faceted head on there. Better, straight. I know what you're thinking. You're probably pretty glad. I bet you're pretty glad that we have machines that make nails now. I want to talk about nails. Right, a nail can hold things pretty strongly, but the strength of nails isn't enough. I have a little demonstration I want to show you here, of kind of bring to life what Isaiah is saying. So Marduk, symbolized by a cow. We did Babylon VBS this summer, and I had a little metal shop with crafts, and I bought this little thing to symbolize it from Dollar Tree, but this was a representation of Marta. So this is kind of what the metalsmiths were making in a way. You can just kind of. This is just a piece of metal nailed to a board, right? Remember I was talking about the Thor action figure, right? If a real storm was coming, this is what they would be putting their trust in. Doesn't look that impressive. I'm sure they could have done a little better job making something that looks a little bit more impressive than that. But how strong is something like this really? I mean, a storm could come. It's not going to save you, right? It's just a thin, flimsy piece of metal nailed to a board. The nails are the only thing of strength that's holding this thing up in this situation. And the message to the people with false hopes in Babylon was this storm is coming. Your false gods are not going to protect you. The idol makers even, the people who should know the clearest that all this was just some pieces of metal nailed to a board. They're not going to see it coming when the real storm comes. Nails driven by human hands they're only of so much value and strength. That's not going to stand in the face of a real storm. So now I want to read the main verses that our theme for chapel comes from. The message to Babylon is, this isn't going to be good enough. To the people who might be tempted to put their trust in the same places that the Babylonians are, God's reminding them, you're my people. And so to God's people waiting in exile, waiting to get set free again, he says this, but you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, you descendants of Abraham, my friend, I took you from the ends of the earth, from its farthest corners I have called you. I said, you are my servant, I have chosen you and not rejected you. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. All who rage against you will surely be ashamed and disgraced. Those who oppose you will be as nothing, perish. Though you search for your enemies, you will not find them. Those who wage war against you will be as nothing at all. For I am the Lord your God, who takes hold of your right hand and says to you, do not fear, I will help you. And so the strength of nails fails before the power of God. And I want to fast forward a little bit to Jesus, right? Because Jesus was called Emmanuel, God with us. And Jesus was nailed to a cross. And Jesus said to the people of his day the same kinds of words that Isaiah said. Fear not, I am with you always to the very ends of the age. And I want to remind you just how just as in Isaiah, how God used nails to show the strength would fail to these Babylonian false gods, that the strength of nails was not enough. God used nails again in Jesus, when Jesus came, to show that the strength of those nails was not enough either. The nails held Jesus to the cross for a time, but there's this Christian cliche, many Christians who would love to tell us that it wasn't the nails that held Jesus to the cross, because the power of the nails wouldn't really hold him if he didn't want them to. That it was his love for us that held him to the cross. And the cross was used in Roman times to spread fear. It was a punishment for people who had defied Rome, people who would make themselves a king or something. And when Rome got really mad and they wanted to make an example out of somebody, they crucified them. And this was a slow and terrible way to die. And if you don't know much about this, it's kind of gruesome, but somebody's had their arms nailed like this and their feet nailed, and they would hang like this, and they couldn't breathe unless they pushed up with their feet. So you had to kind of torture yourself. You had to push against the nail in your feet to fight for every breath until you couldn't do it anymore and died. It was a terrible, gruesome way. It took a long, long time for people to die. They wanted to make sure that people got the message. That if you walk in the way that this person walked, this is your fate. Did that before the people and eventually died. And Jesus was taken down from the cross and thrown into a grave, and the grave couldn't really hold him either. Jesus said, do not be afraid, I am with you, I will save you. Storms and wars will come. Terrible things may happen. But but you can know that you have been saved and that nothing in this life can take that away from you. God gave us Jesus. Jesus laid down his life. No one took his life from him. He laid it down on his own accord. And he did that because he loved you and he loved me. And because he did that, we have been given new life, a new life that nothing in this world can take away from us. And so there's a sense in which the weakness of nails point to the glory of God. And if anything sends a message to fear not, it's the example of Jesus. It's God himself coming to bring the message, coming to show the message, this whole message with his life, with his teachings, with his death on the cross, with his rising again. Nails couldn't keep the false god standing up, and the nails couldn't keep Jesus on the cross any longer than he chose to stay there. And even though when Jesus rises again, there's still nail marks in his body, this is now transformed to show the victory of God. The nails are gone. The nails didn't win. And I think that answers this idea of why can we choose not to be afraid, you know? The nails couldn't stop Jesus. The sin of the world couldn't stop Jesus. The cross and the grave, the power of death and hell couldn't stop Jesus. Nothing could stop Jesus. And because Jesus is with us, our fears can melt away. And we see in the example of Jesus, even when the combined might of the world is turned against one person in this way, you know, even when the forces of chaos are big and scary and you turn on the news and it looks like we're going to enter World War III, even if the devil comes like a roaring lion and stands in front of you, even if he were to eat you, even that couldn't take away what Jesus did. And even then, these words Isaiah gave God's people are still true. All who rage against you will surely be ashamed and disgraced. Those who oppose you will be as nothing and perish. Though you search for your enemies, you will not find them. Those who wage war against you will be as nothing at all. For I am the Lord your God, who takes hold of your right hand and says to you, do not fear, I will help you. So I tried to make enough for everyone. So a couple of you might not get one today, but I tried to make as many nails last night as I could, so that each of you would have one. I want to have your teacher come up and tell me how many are in the class. I have enough at least for the kindergartners through sixth graders, and then we can go from there. And I'm going to come to the fall festival, and I'll have a booth set up. And if you didn't get one today, if you come, I will try to make some more and bring them then. So I'm going to have a prayer and then a closing song. And during the closing song, if you're a teacher, who, by the way, I will also make some for you at some point. While the song's playing, just come up to me and tell me how many's in your class, and I'll send those with you. So, will you pray with me? So, gracious God, we just thank you that you are with us, that you are there to help us, that your sacrifice has brought us the freedom from the pain and the trauma that this world can bring. And we can live into some of that freedom now, and ultimately that you will bless us with new life and restoration forever. We thank you that you are with us. We thank you that we can be unafraid because you are with us. And I just pray that you would remind us that the nails that usually remind us of your sacrifice also show that you overcame, and that the power of nails couldn't win. Lord, we thank you for your goodness to us and for your grace. I pray, Lord, that you would help us to put our trust in your strength, to know that you are with us and that we don't have to be afraid. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So I'm James Tower, and I'm the blacksmithing pastor. If you would like the video, share the video with people that might actually like the video. If you would comment on the video, that's a free way you could support me. But for now, I just thank you for watching, and I thank you for your attention, your time, and I hope that you would be blessed by what I'm trying to do. Take care, blessings on you, and I'll see you for the next one.